U.S. Election 2024. Joe Biden and Donald Trump can still withdraw. LBJ made it practically impossible. Like Lyndon Baines Johnson nearly 56 years ago, some voters likely hold out hope that Joe Biden and/or Donald Trump will bow to popular pressure and withdraw from the presidential campaign. After all, Trump is facing 4 distinct criminal prosecutions, while Biden has heard numerous people criticize his age. As a result of these developments, political watchers on both sides of the aisle are wondering if Trump and Biden should stay or go. Except in the case of a medical emergency or death, it is highly unlikely to occur. The political climate changed drastically after Johnson's unexpected retirement, thus it was never going to happen. For decades after Lyndon B. Johnson's shocking statement on March 31, 1968, the system that favors wealthy candidates and sitting presidents, primaries and caucuses, was the only way to choose presidential nominees. On this occasion, that encompasses both Biden and Trump. In the words of presidential historian Joshua Zeitz, the political parties established new regulations that basically constituted the primary and caucus system. After the current and previous presidents secured the Republican and Democratic nominations on Tuesday, it is practically too late for Biden or Trump to withdraw from the campaign for the White House, thanks to the specter of LBJ. It was also never going to happen due to the party's reactions to the turbulent 1968 election. After John F. Kennedy's assassination in 1963, Johnson became president and went on to win a landslide victory in 1964. Still, in the beginning of 1968, he found himself in a precarious political position. Senators Eugene McCarthy and Robert F. Kennedy, the younger brother of the assassinated president, were 2 notable anti-war contenders for the Democratic nomination, undermining Johnson's support. Both were able to rally groups of young people who were against the war. Johnson announced a bombing pause and urged the North Vietnamese to negotiate in a primetime address he gave on Sunday night, March 31, 1968. A shocking conclusion was an afterthought. The president continued by saying, "I should not let the presidency to become engaged in the partisan differences that are developing in this political year." He continued, "I do not believe that I should spend an hour or a day of my time to any personal partisan interests." Therefore, he declared, "I will not run for president again, and I refuse to accept my party's nomination to do so." In the near term, a candidate who did not participate in the primary. The assassination of John F. Kennedy, the decline in support for Joseph McCarthy, and the eventual nomination of Vice President Hubert Humphrey, a late entry who did not participate in any primaries, by the Democrats occurred in the months following Johnson's withdrawal from the 1968 election. According to Zeitz, just 15 states used primaries to select delegates to the convention in those days. This occurred during an era when influential members of the party, like Johnson, still held considerable influence over the selection of presidential candidates. Zeitz, author of Building the Great Society, Inside Lyndon Johnson's White House, stated that Humphrey did not run in a single primary. And lo and behold, he stood before the convention, anointed. After Humphrey's defeat in the 1968 general election by Republican Richard Nixon, a contentious race that also included states' rights segregationist George Wallace, everything changed. In response to the mayhem in 1968, the Democratic Party and, later, the Republican Party, instituted new nomination procedures based on more substantial primaries and caucuses, so, in principle, empowering voters to choose their own party's representatives. It was in the primaries that long-shot contenders like Jimmy Carter, 1976, George McGovern, 1972, and Barack Obama, 2008, were able to gain an advantage over their more favored rivals. Their success extended to the White House, and they did it by gaining traction at the state level rather than among influential party brokers. In 1976, former California Governor Ronald Reagan ran a formidable campaign to Republican incumbent Gerald Ford in the presidential election by utilizing the primary system. In 1980, Reagan became the president. In 2016, without the LBJ nomination system, a political newcomer like Trump would not have had a chance of winning. In spite of a deluge of investigations and civil judgments totaling over $500 million, he remains firmly entrenched in the party he seized through his primaries victories. Energy and resources. Due to two crucial factors, time and money, primaries have always favored incumbents, with the exception of affluent challengers. With an ever-lengthening election season, states are holding delegate selection elections earlier and earlier in an effort to leverage their influence. Unknown candidates have less time to gain support and funds the faster an election begins. The extended election cycle may help some rising stars win, but it creates a huge barrier for less well-known candidates. It's considerably more expensive to pursue a war for the presidency, remarked Mark K. Updegrove, president and CEO of the LBJ Foundation in Austin, a presidential historian. On March 31, 1968, Lyndon B. Johnson withdrew from the run for president. Nowadays, nominations are usually sealed by that point. For example, Trump and Biden were nominated this year. The other reasons LBJ gave for dropping out are relevant even now. According to Updegrove, who wrote Indomitable Will LBJ in the Presidency, Johnson resigned in 1968 for other reasons that are still relevant today. As a recovering addict and survivor of a heart attack, Johnson fretted over his physical well-being and the prospect of serving another term as president. He passed away around the beginning of 1973. As Updegrove pointed out, Johnson was concerned that his re-election could further split the country, an already polarized country. Some Democrats have been hustling for Biden to do an LBJ on health and age issues for a while now. Even though President Biden has not received a formal diagnosis of major health problems, poll after poll has demonstrated that people are concerned about his age as he seeks an additional 4 years in office. Ultimately, no prominent Democrat has been successful in garnering enough support from the president to challenge Biden, thanks to the benefits of incumbency that he had after LBJ. U.S. Representative Dean Phillips jumped in, but he didn't achieve anything. Trump has amassed a number of delegates. Meanwhile, Trump officially launched his campaign towards the end of 2022, sponging up attention and funds as a quasi-incumbent. That paved the way for formidable opponents, such as Ron DeSantis of Florida and Nikki Haley of South Carolina, to fail to gain traction. The possibility of the former president's removal from the ticket in the event of a conviction in any of the 4 trials currently underway against him was a concern for several Republicans after Trump's apparent march to the nomination. Very unlikely. As a result of the primary system that came into effect after LBJ, Trump has amassed the delegates necessary to win the nomination. With the former president facing 4 sets of indictments, a sweeping defamation trial over a sexual assault accusation, and a loan fraud prosecution, the National Republican Party may have had more influence in a different time. Nonetheless, the ex-president has received substantial backing from the Republican National Committee. Donald Trump's daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, made a solemn commitment that every single penny would go to the number one and the only job of the RNC, after receiving backing from her father as RNC co-chair. The previous president's re-election. Everything has changed in the system. Lyndon Baines Johnson's actions in 1968 were commonplace during his period. For U.S. presidents, Theodore Roosevelt, Calvin Coolidge, Harry Truman, and Lyndon Johnson, took office after their predecessors died in the 20th century. As Updegrove noted, each of the 4 went on to win their own election, and then they all decided not to run in the subsequent election. As a result of his decision's lasting effects, Johnson will likely retire before serving the maximum number of terms allowed by the Constitution, making him the last president to do so.